There's a strange thing about leadership. We often assume that if someone has a lot of followers, they must be a leader. But history has shown us, painfully, repeatedly, that this is not always true. Some people gather followers by inspiring our highest possibilities. Others gather followers by inflaming our lowest fears. Some leaders help us become more honest, more courageous, more compassionate, and more awake. And some leaders make us smaller, more reactive, more suspicious, more tribal, more willing to trade our conscience for comfort. So today, I want to ask a deceptively simple question. What makes a leader worth following? Not just powerful, not just popular, not just charismatic or confident, but actually worth following. Because a person can have authority and still lack wisdom. A person can have confidence and still lack character. A person can say all the right words and still lead people in the wrong direction. So the real question is not who has the loudest voice. The real question is who helps us become more fully human. And this matters because leadership is not just something that happens in governments or corporations. Leadership happens in families, in friendships, in classrooms, in spiritual communities, in online spaces, in moments of conflict, and in moments of fear. And sometimes leadership happens quietly, when one person simply chooses to act with more wisdom and compassion than the situation seems to invite. Let's begin with a distinction that can save us a lot of confusion. Power is the ability to influence what people do. Leadership is the ability to influence what people become. Power can force behavior. Leadership awakens participation. Power can make people comply. Leadership helps people care. Power says, do this because I said so. Leadership says, here is why this matters, and here is the kind of future we can build together. Now, of course, real leaders often have some kind of power. They may have a title, a platform, a position, a role, but title alone does not make someone worth following. A badge does not guarantee wisdom. A microphone does not guarantee truth. A million followers does not guarantee integrity. A leader worth following has something deeper than status. They have a kind of inner alignment. What they say, what they do, and what they serve are not wildly disconnected. And you can feel it, especially as your own inner wisdom and compassion grow. There's a steadiness there, not perfection, not sainthood, not some impossible image of always being calm and wise, but a kind of sincerity, a sense that this person is not merely trying to be seen, they are trying to serve something real. And I think that's where wisdom and compassion become essential, because wisdom asks what is true, and compassion asks what helps. A leader worth following needs both. Wisdom without compassion can become cold. Compassion without wisdom can become naive. But together they create something powerful, clear seeing in the service of the good. The first quality of a leader worth following is truthfulness. And I don't just mean they never technically say anything false. I mean something deeper. A leader worth following has a basic loyalty to reality. They do not constantly bend the truth to protect their ego. They do not manipulate people by telling them only what they want to hear. They do not turn every mistake into someone else's fault. They are willing to say, I was wrong. I don't know. We need to look at this more honestly. That is more complicated than I first thought. And these may sound like weak statements in a culture obsessed with certainty, but they are actually signs of strength. Because when a leader cannot admit reality, everyone around them eventually has to pretend. And when a whole group of people begins pretending together, bad things happen. Truthfulness is not brutality. It is not, I'm just being honest, as an excuse to be cruel. Real truthfulness is clean. It does not humiliate. It does not need to dominate. It tries to see clearly, speak responsibly, and adjust when new evidence appears. A leader worth following does not ask us to worship their certainty. They invite us into a deeper relationship with truth. They make it safer to see what is actually happening. And that is incredibly important. Because communities do not fall apart only because people disagree. Communities fall apart when truth itself becomes threatening. When people are punished for honesty. When loyalty to the leader becomes more important than loyalty to reality. So one of the first tests of a leadership is this. Does this person help people face reality or escape from it? Do they help us become more honest, or do they simply give us a more comfortable illusion? The second quality is care. A leader worth following cares about the people affected by their decisions, not abstractly, not just as a slogan, not just as a photo opportunity, but in a real, practical, embodied way. They understand that leadership is not a game of looking important. It is a responsibility to living beings. And this is where compassion matters, because without compassion, leadership can become a machine, efficient maybe, impressive maybe, but disconnected from the human heart. A leader without compassion may ask, how do we win? But a compassionate leader also asks, who gets hurt if we win this way? What are we sacrificing? Whose voice is missing? What would this decision feel like to the person with the least power in the room? Care does not mean pleasing everyone. That's important. A compassionate leader is not someone who simply avoids discomfort. Sometimes care requires hard conversations. Sometimes care requires boundaries. Sometimes care requires saying no. And sometimes care requires disappointing people in the short term to protect something deeper in the long term. This is why compassion is not weakness. Compassion is the strength to remain connected to the humanity of others, even when the situation is difficult. It means you do not reduce people to obstacles. You do not reduce opponents to monsters. You do not reduce suffering to an inconvenience. A leader worth following remembers that people are not just pieces on a chessboard. They are worlds. Each person carries fears, hopes, wounds, dreams, responsibilities, and invisible struggles. And the leader who remembers this will lead differently. Maybe more slowly sometimes, maybe with more listening, maybe with more patience, but also with more depth, because people may follow power for a while, but they trust care. The third quality is courage, because a leader worth following cannot merely be nice. Niceness is pleasant, but courage is necessary. There are moments when truth has a cost. There are moments when compassion has a cost. There are moments when doing the right thing may make you less popular. And this is where leadership becomes real. It is easy to lead when everyone is clapping. It is easy to speak when your words are safe. It is easy to have values when they are not being tested. But a leader worth following has the courage to remain faithful to what matters, even when it becomes inconvenient. Courage does not always look dramatic. Sometimes courage is a whistleblower telling the truth. Sometimes courage is a parent apologizing to a child. Sometimes courage is a manager protecting an employee from unfair pressure. And sometimes courage is a friend saying, I love you, but I don't think this is good for you. Sometimes courage is a community member saying, we need to talk about the harm we've been avoiding. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear become your highest authority. And this is especially important because fear is one of the easiest tools for false leadership. If someone can keep people afraid enough, they can often keep them loyal. Afraid of outsiders, afraid of change, afraid of complexity, afraid of asking questions, afraid of losing status, afraid of being rejected by the group. A leader worth following does not exploit fear. They help people metabolize fear. They help people become braver, clearer, and more responsible. Not reckless, not aggressive, but courageous. The kind of courage that says, we can face this. We can tell the truth. We can repair what has been harmed. We can move forward without becoming what we hate. That kind of courage is rare, and when we find it, we should pay attention. The fourth quality is humility, and humility may be one of the most misunderstood leadership qualities. Humility does not mean thinking poorly of yourself. It does not mean being passive. It does not mean pretending you have nothing to offer. Real humility means you understand that you are not the whole story. You have a perspective. You do not have all perspectives. You have knowledge. You do not have all knowledge. You have gifts. You are not the only one with gifts. A humble leader is not constantly trying to prove that they are the smartest person in the room. They are trying to make the room wiser. That is a very different thing. A prideful leader needs to be the source of every answer. A humble leader wants the best answer to emerge. A prideful leader feels threatened by talent. A humble leader develops talent. A prideful leader creates dependence. A humble leader creates capacity. And this is one of the clearest signs of a leader worth following. When you are around them, do you feel more capable, more awake, more responsible, more connected to your own conscience? Or do you feel smaller, more dependent, more afraid to think for yourself? A true leader does not need to shrink others in order to stand tall. They help others stand tall too. That's humility, not self-erasure, but self-transcendence, the ability to serve something larger than your ego. So here is the heart of it. Here's the deepest test. A leader worth following makes you more free. Not free in the shallow sense of I can do whatever I want, but free in the deeper sense. Free from unnecessary fear. Free from manipulation. Free from confusion. Free from the need to hate in order to belong. Free from the belief that your worth depends on defeating someone else. Free to think. Free to care. Free to tell the truth. Free to become more fully yourself. False leaders often create followers who cannot function without them. They make people addicted to their voice, their certainty, their approval, their enemy list, their version of reality. But a wise leader does something very different. A wise leader helps people grow beyond dependency. They help people develop inner strength, inner clarity, inner responsibility. They do not say, trust me instead of yourself. They say, let me help you become trustworthy to yourself. That is profound, because the highest form of leadership is not control, it is liberation. The parent who raises a child into healthy independence, the teacher who helps the student find their own mind, the mentor who celebrates when the apprentice surpasses them, the spiritual guide who does not demand worship but points beyond themselves, the community leader who creates more leaders, the friend who helps you remember your own dignity. This is leadership as service, leadership as stewardship, leadership as the art of helping life become more whole. And that kind of leadership is worth following because it does not ask us to abandon ourselves. It asks us to become ourselves more deeply. A leader worth following does not merely gather people around their own greatness. They awaken greatness in others. Not egoic greatness, not domination, not superiority, but the greatness of honesty, the greatness of courage and compassion and responsibility, the greatness of becoming a little more wise and a little more loving in a world that desperately needs both. Now, it's easy to listen to all of this and think only about public leaders, politicians, CEOs, religious figures, influencers, people with platforms. And yes, we should absolutely ask whether these people are worth following. But there's another question, maybe a more uncomfortable one. Am I becoming the kind of person worth following? Because leadership is not only a role, it is also a way of being. Every time we tell the truth when lying would be easier, we practice leadership. Every time we listen instead of immediately defending ourselves, we practice leadership. Every time we refuse to dehumanize someone, even when we strongly disagree, we are practicing leadership. Every time we choose repair over revenge, we are practicing leadership. Every time we make room for wisdom and compassion in a reactive world, we are practicing leadership. The world does not only need better leaders out there, it needs more leadership in here, in our nervous systems, in our homes, in our conversations, and in our communities, in the way we use power, however small that power may seem. Because every one of us influences someone, a child, a friend, a co-worker, a partner, a stranger online, a room we walk into, a conversation we either inflame or soften. So maybe the question is not only what makes a leader worth following, maybe the question is also, what kind of presence am I bringing into the world? Am I increasing fear or increasing clarity? Am I increasing contempt or increasing understanding? Am I increasing noise or increasing wisdom? Am I making people smaller or helping them become more whole? So what makes a leader worth following? Not perfection, not popularity, not charisma alone. A leader worth following is someone who helps us live closer to truth, someone who uses power with care, someone who has courage when values become costly, someone humble enough to listen, learn, and serve something larger than their own ego. And most of all, a leader worth following helps us become more free, more honest, more compassionate, more responsible, and more awake. They do not simply ask, "Will you follow me?" They help us ask, what is worth serving? What is worth protecting? What is worth becoming? Maybe the best leaders are not the ones who stand above us. Maybe they are the ones who walk with us long enough to help us remember the path. And then, eventually, they trust us to walk it too. So as we look at the leaders around us, and as we examine the leader within us, may we ask not only who has power, but Who brings wisdom? Who brings compassion? Who helps life become more whole? Because those are the leaders worth following, and those are the leaders worth becoming. If this reflection was helpful, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who is thinking deeply about leadership, character, and the kind of world we are trying to build together. And as always, may we continue growing in wisdom, compassion, and courage.